The topic that came up was actually polyamory, and I thought that was interesting because uh, it's something that I've only kind of discovered and learned about in the last few years. I mean, it's something that I knew about, but didn't really put a lot of thought into. And I ended up kind of changing my lifestyle and figuring a lot of stuff out. So I'm going to put the huge disclaimer right up front that I am not an expert and that a lot of people interpret this differently and that I am in no way like an advanced level poly person who can tell you how things work. I'm not even 100% sure how I identify, but I've learned a lot and I've read a lot and I've studied the topic extensively. I lived most of my life monogamously. I was with one person at a time, and I had a girlfriend, and then we'd break up, and then I would move on to the next girlfriend, and that was pretty much it. And then I was with one person for a long time, and I got married, and kind of like, well, this is how things are. And when it ended, it forced me to kind of reevaluate my life. And I initially started doing things because it was a defense mechanism. So for me, when I waited a few months of being single and I decided, well, I want to date, but I don't want to date very seriously. Unbeknownst to me, like, it actually is kind of a form of poly, but it wasn't until I was with someone for a longer period of time, where I kind of discovered like the different layers and started reading about it. And there's a lot of different topics to cover here, but I like to think of it as sort of beginning, intermediate, and advanced poly. And just for the people out there that don't know, like, the fundamental of poly, at least as I see it, is that you can love more than one person at the same time. I mean, that's boiled it down to completely bottom line. That's pretty much it. You can love more than one person at the same time. We love our friends, our family, our pets, our brothers, our sisters, our mom, our uncle, and we love all those people. And the fact that we love one of them doesn't take away from the fact that we love another one of them. We don't love our mom less because we love our dad. And I think that for me, that's kind of the basis of poly. When I was growing up and I was dating and I was a teenager, I kind of thought to myself, like, well, why can't you love more than one person? Like, why can't you, have 3 wives if you got really serious with 3 people? And turns out that's actually illegal. Polygamy is a different beast than polyamory. But with the beginning, the intermediate, and the advanced, the way I see it, is a lot of people kind of discover it like the way I discovered it, which is kind of slowly and in stages, which, society kind of points out monogamy as the standard, and that's what we all kind of strive for and attain. But a lot of people start to open up their marriages, and there's people that have open relationships, there are people that do swinging, there are people that have affairs that are totally unethical, and to make a point here, the whole point of polyamory, at least the whole point of any kind of polyamory I'm discussing, is called ethical non-monogamy, which means that it is done with the consent and understanding of everyone involved. So no one is cheating on anyone, no one is hurting anyone, no one is doing anything behind someone's back, unless that's your arrangement and you're into that. There's kind of what I consider the intermediate poly, which is, rather than just kind of have the monogamous dynamic that kind of breaks out a little bit, there's a separate dynamic that is more of everyone on the same page, everyone intermingling their partners. So that's what I guess kind of think of as poly, like, the down the middle version of poly, which is that you might have another partner and another partner, and so let's say you have 3, and then those people have other partners and other partners, and then some of these partners all know each other. There's instances like a triad where 3 people all love each other. That kind of usually requires someone who's at least bisexual. There's a ton of different configurations. There isn't a rule book. You weren't given a guidebook saying this is how to do it. You have Disney movies and you have romantic comedies telling you, like, chase the girl of your dreams to an airport and, she'll love you forever. But there isn't really like a hard and fast set of rules, and a lot of people will fall back on anthropological arguments and say like, well, it's not natural or whatever. And in fact, I mean, it seems to be very natural, and some things I can recommend for you are some books to read about it. So one of them is Sex at Dawn, which is kind of an anthropological standpoint on non-monogamy and how it like works into human nature. And the whole concept that most people have of monogamy is sort of based on kind of Darwinian observations of primates who we consider closest to us, and they're monogamous, and we're like, that's the way it is. And they're also violent, and we're like, that's the way the human race is. But, a lot of research past that and later has determined that we're actually a lot more like other kinds of primates who are non-monogamous, and, it could be argued that we're a lot more like them than we are like gorillas or apes or things like that. So there is a scientific basis. There are many cultures that practice non-monogamy. There are tribes that have lived that way for hundreds of years and have no problems. There's lots of background there and a lot of history. Check out Sex at Dawn. It's a great book. If you want a primer on poly in general, check out The Ethical Slut, which is another good one. And More Than Two is another great book. And the reason I would tell you to like study this and read up on it is that for me, I didn't realize there were so many shades to relationships. I kind of think of it as monogamy being the color blue. And you've grown up with the color blue, and you know every shade of the color blue, and you know that you like blue, and you know that blue works for you, and that your partner likes blue. And then when you're 30 years old, you realize there are a ton of other colors, and that you've never looked into them, you've never seen them, you've never explored their depths. You just know blue from light blue to dark blue. And so it's a weird metaphor, but it kind of explains like the depth of what else is out there. How many other things that you can look into, and how many other things that you can do in a relationship. And there being no rules means that you can craft the kind of relationship you want. One caveat I would put in there is that just like learning to do filmmaking or painting or photography or code or anything like that, that you should learn the rules before you break them. And the concept there is, like if you're learning to make a movie, you learn how to frame shots, you learn how to edit video, you learn how to direct actors, and you learn how that's done on a standard level. And then you break those rules and you make crazy Quentin Tarantino movies, that don't follow the standard format. And it's just like that with a relationship. It's best to know like what monogamy is, what non-monogamy is, what open is, what poly is, the different versions and brands and kinds out there. Learn a lot about it. For me personally, I wasn't able to fit into a label, and I still don't fit into a label. So I've tried different ones. I've actually done stuff that, looking back on it, I could label. And so I engaged in what was an open relationship, which was I was with someone who was my partner, and neither of us wanted to be exclusive, and neither of us wanted to put a title on it. We don't want to be boyfriend and girlfriend. We don't... We came to an arrangement that worked for us. It was just something that we discussed, and then we kind of figured it out, and he said, well, we both want to date other people, and we're going to do that, and we're not really going to be held back by the other person, we're not going to ask for permission, and we're just going to see what works. And it started out like that for me, very fast and loose, and with no particular framework and no rules, and it kind of worked out. And what we ended up doing was one of us would bring up one of our other partners or someone else that we're dating, and sometimes it would make the other person uncomfortable. And not really knowing, hi Cam, talking about polyamory, not really knowing what we were doing, one of the conclusions that we came to was well, we don't want to hear about it. And so what that's actually called is a don't ask, don't tell relationship. And there is totally a category for that and a label for that, don't ask, don't tell, which means that you can go off and have the adventures that you want to have, you can date other people, you can sleep with other people, and, obviously, you want to tell the truth. Yes, I was with someone, yes, I went on a date, but I don't want to know the details. And, hi Quinn. Yeah, don't ask, don't tell was kind of my stepping stone into poly, which was that we're both doing this, but we both don't really want to talk about it. And I think that's just a side effect of being brand new to this and kind of stumbling into a relationship type that was new for me anyway. And eventually it opened up a little more. It got to the point where we met each other's partners, and we kind of eased our way from beginner into more poly, into the more traditional poly, where you actually know the other people's partners and you're cool with them and you meet them. Everyone isn't sleeping with everyone, but everyone knows everyone. And then after that relationship ended, or somewhere around there, I ended up getting into another kind of poly and another type of relationship. And I ended up dating someone who identifies as solo poly. And on paper, solo poly sounds great, and solo poly makes sense to me. Solo poly is kind of the hardcore, the more advanced version of poly as I see it. And what that means is that you don't have a hierarchy, which means that you don't have a primary partner and a secondary partner. So you don't rank people one above the other. It means that you have no intent of kind of nesting with someone, which is the phrase they use to say, like, moving in with someone, intermingling your finances with someone, following the relationship escalator to its logical monogamous conclusion of you move in together, you get married, etc., etc. There are people that don't want to follow that format. Another great article, by the way, look up The Relationship Escalator. It's an awesome breakdown of what monogamy is and how it's kind of expected to be and why a lot of people resist that framework. So, The Relationship Escalator, Google it, you'll find awesome things. So, anyway, I got involved with someone who identified as solo poly, and for them, they had a very firm idea of what they wanted. They wanted to not be held back by anyone. They wanted to be able to kind of experience everything and do whatever they wanted to do, and not be beholden to anyone, not present as a couple, which is another big piece there. Some people don't want to be seen as part of a couple. Some people don't want the privilege that goes along with being a couple. And it's difficult to say, like, at what point is a good idea, at what point works for you, that kind of thing. For me, I consider it the advanced poly because I consider it a more extreme form, where you're kind of keeping everyone at arm's length to retain your independence. And your independence is pretty severe. So no, someone can't say, like, I don't like your behavior. I mean, they can say, I don't like your behavior, but, they're not your boyfriend, they're not your husband, they're not your keeper, so to speak. So, you can do whatever you want, and you can let them know, like, hey, these are my boundaries, like, deal with them or don't. And that's sort of the same for any relationship, any monogamous relationship, any, poly relationship. It is fundamentally based on communication. And you're going to need to communicate a lot. And if you need to communicate a lot in a monogamous relationship, you need to communicate 2, 3, 4 times as much in a poly relationship, and you need to do that with 2, 3, 4 times as many people. It's not the easy route. It's not the super fun route. It's not necessarily, just a thrill ride. It's not something you do for fun. It's actually, you're signing up for a lot. Some people identify wholly as polyamorous. Like, that's the way I am inside, that's how I am internally, that's how I live my life. Me personally, and from the books and things that I've read, I believe that you can change your mind. And that you can have any kind of relationship that you want to have, and you can have any kind of relationship that you want to have at any time that you want to have it. So, if you're monogamous today and you decide, hey, I want to date more people, bam, you are poly and you're exploring poly. And if in a couple years you decide, you know what, I really liked being monogamous and I liked having one partner and it was more comforting for me to think that that person would be there forever, and you can go back to being monogamous. You can do things like a poly person can date a monogamous person, and that monogamous person can only be with them, and that poly person can be with 3 other people. So it sounds like it's unfair, but if this person is getting what they want, which is a monogamous partner that's just for them, and that's all they want in their life is this partner, and they're happy with that, and this person needs to be fulfilled, and they're seeing, a person A, B, and C, and they're also committed to this person. I'm not going to go through every possible configuration, but the point is that you can build this up any way that you want to, and I believe that. I believe that you can build it any way that you want to, and I believe that you can find the kind of relationship that works for you. Me personally, like, I have tried a bunch of different labels. I've tried open, I've tried poly, I've tried solo poly, I've tried relationship anarchy, which is another category altogether, also in the advanced realm, where you basically define all the rules yourself. You're not following a set framework. You're not following what is traditionally acceptable as, 2 or 3 or 4 partner polyamory. Relationship anarchy means that everyone makes up their own rules and you develop your own framework, which sounds like the easiest thing, but it's actually the hardest thing because you have to kind of negotiate and figure out and communicate every facet of the relationship rather than falling back on any kind of standard. One of the things I want to talk about was primary, secondary, and hierarchy. Basically, in a traditional kind of down the middle poly, you generally have one person who is still your primary. You are with that person, they're with you, and you are each other's main squeeze. You both kind of branch out and have other partners and have other experiences. You may have feelings for those people, you may love those people, but you consider this person your primary. And so what that does is put other people into what's called a secondary, which, hi Julia, the secondary label I don't like because it's not good to identify anyone in any relationship as less important than someone else, which is why something like solo poly or some of the more advanced versions of poly make more sense to me, because I don't like ranking people and I don't like putting someone above another person, saying this person gets 90% of my time, you get 10% of my time, and that's all you're allowed. I mean, that works for a lot of people, but for me, like, that feels kind of weird, and it feels like disrespectful to person B. And I think that everything can be negotiated and everything can be communicated. There are definitely types of poly that don't have a hierarchy, but I haven't even figured out where I fall on this. Like, and I'm just kind of covering different topics. Dating versus poly. A lot of people talk about, well, if you're just seeing a bunch of people and you're sleeping with a bunch of people, like, aren't you just dating? And it's similar, I think, to dating and, like, the beginnings of poly, but you're also talking about, like, serious feelings. That you love someone, that you love this person and this person, that you have, like, real connected feelings, and that you're looking for a relationship with more than one person. And I think fundamentally that's the difference between dating and sleeping around, or solo poly, and then actual poly, is that you are looking for multiple meaningful relationships and multiple meaningful connections. How you frame those is kind of up to you and each individual person. Let's see. A lot of people kind of consider it thrill-seeking, and I have found that there are bad kinds of poly. One is the non-ethical poly, which is basically people that are just cheating, like people that are just sleeping with multiple people and not telling the other people what they're doing. That is, to me, like, non-ethical and like a shitty thing to do. And so I think it should be communicated like, hey, I'm, this kind of person and I want this kind of relationship and I want to see different people. And a lot of people are scared to admit that, and a lot of people are scared to bring that out. I've been guilty of meeting people and chatting them up and getting to know them and not saying like, hey, this is my relationship framework, because I'm afraid it's going to scare them off. And if you feel that way here in the Bay Area, I mean, know that you are in like the mecca of poly. Like, as much as poly like might be a little taboo or like might be a little weird around here, it is like 200 times more accepted here than 90% of the country. So if you're gonna be poly, you might as well be in the Bay Area, at least as far as I'm concerned. A lot of people ask, is jealousy a thing? Do you not get jealous? And jealousy is a human emotion. It's a fundamental thing. It's always going to be a thing in your life. Even if you're not dating someone, I mean, jealousy happens. Jealous feelings are just like angry feelings or sad feelings. You're going to experience jealousy. There are some things about that I think are important, which is that jealousy you can learn to deal with. You can learn to cope, you can learn to analyze it, you can see where the root of those things are. Is it because you feel left out? Is it because you feel sexually challenged? Is it because you are afraid that this person will take away that person's time from you? There's a lot of work you can do on jealousy to kind of figure out why jealousy happens. And the work that you can do for that, I think, is amazing and useful for anyone in any relationship. I know so many people who are poly who experience jealousy, but I know a whole lot more people who are monogamous and experience jealousy. And they have extreme jealousy because now all their hopes and dreams are pinned on one person, and if that one person looks at someone else, it's the end of the world. So, you know, definitely keep in mind that jealousy is a thing. But one of the counterpoints to jealousy is a concept called ownership, or owning your feelings. And when you take ownership of your feelings, you're basically saying, well, I choose how I want to feel. Ultimately, you have control of your life. You have control of how things affect you. If you get a flat tire tomorrow, you can get really pissed, and you can have a bad day, and you can complain, and you can call out from work, and you can have a horrible time. Someone who puts a different spin on that could say, well, you know, it gives me a chance to learn how to change a tire, and it actually gets me out of work, and it's, you know, something that isn't really that bad or that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. And, you know, to me, that's a good example of, like, how you let something affect you. And so when it comes to jealousy and when it comes to difficult, conflicting feelings, it's important to own that you often define how those things affect you. So if someone does something that you don't like, you can communicate to them, but you can also think about, like, well, why don't I like it? And if I don't like it, is it because it actually affects me or because I think it might? And there's a whole lot more to that too. Once again, I'm not an expert, but ownership and owning your feelings is another concept, I think, for anyone in any kind of relationship. And so, boy, there's so many things to cover. It's just daunting here. Let's see, I made notes so I could refer to this. Some good examples I've heard about poly. Let's see. A good friend of mine told me one time, she said, well, imagine your best friend in the whole world. Someone that you've known since you were 5 years old, you know, since childhood. There couldn't be anyone on this planet any closer than them, right? Like your best friend. Now, think about your relationship over the years, over the last 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years. And there are times in that relationship with the person you know, care about the most, like the person that's always going to be there in your life, where you have grown closer together and further apart and come back. There's times where you talked less. There's times where you didn't see each other at all. There's times where you lived in different states. And then you come back and that bond is still there. And thanks. So what's important about that is you think that that's totally fine. You take that as acceptable within a really important, serious relationship in your life. But you have a different expectation of your monogamous partner, which is that this person, who I've known would say probably a whole lot less than your best friend, let's say for 2 years or 5 or 10, that you think realistically that you're not going to grow apart, that you're not going to create distance, and that you're not going to, like, have times where you feel closer and feel further apart. And once again, this is a friend of mine kind of giving this as a quote, but she said, isn't it better to plan for that reality than to be blindsided by it? And historically, and across a lot of time in relationships, you know, in the past couple hundred years, affairs are a thing. Like, they're super duper common. Like, they're so common that they're actually, like, acceptable and crafted into some kinds of societies and history and things like that. Brothels and mistresses and things like that are all things that we're totally comfortable with, that we understand. But the reason those things exist is because, like, people want other things sometimes. And you can say, like, well, you just need to be, like, super dedicated. You need to, like, buckle down and, you know, love that person more and dedicate yourself to them more. And you can do that. Like, there's nothing wrong with monogamy. Like, and I think that's another big point. You're not wrong if you're monogamous. You're not wrong if you're poly. You know, just like you're not wrong if you're gay. Like, you can... Thanks, Cam. You can have the kind of relationship that feels right to you. And I think of it seriously, like, just as like the kind of concept of being gay or, like, you know, changing your gender or anything like that is, you know, a big thing that is up to you and you alone, what works for you. And I wouldn't judge anyone for being monogamous any more than I would for being poly, and vice versa. I'm getting toward a pretty long video here, and I feel like I've jumped around a lot. If you guys have any questions, throw them out there. I'll try to wrap up. One of the things that I've come to the conclusion of is that I've tried a couple different labels and I didn't like them. I found them too confining. And I like the concept of communication, and I like the concept of crafting your own reality and crafting your own relationship. So I've actually like kind of done monogamy, and I've done poly, and I've done open, and I've done solo poly, and I've done all these different things, and I don't even particularly identify as a poly person, because I'm not hell-bent on being poly. I'm not hell-bent on being solo poly. I'm not hell-bent on fitting a label or an ideal of someone else's. So if I decide to be in a monogamous relationship or in a relationship that is just open, I won't, I'll do it if that feels right to me, and if I communicate with a partner and it turns out that that's what's going to work best for us, or that's what we want. And I think communication is, thank you. I think communication is the biggest, most fundamental base thing here, that you can talk and talk and talk and talk and build up with your partners, like, what is it that we both want? How can we compromise? How can we meet in the middle? And how can we find something that works for us? And I'm personally like more of the opinion that that is the most important thing, and that that is what is going to make a successful relationship of any kind, of monogamy, of poly, of solo poly, of relationship anarchy. There are people that have non-sexual relationships. There are people that have polyamorous non-sexual relationships, like non-sexual relationships that are serious with 3 or 4 people. There's a million different types out there. And it's up to you to kind of figure out what works for you, communicating that with someone, finding out what works for them, seeing if you can meet in the middle, and building upon that. So fundamentally, communication, crafting your own reality, crafting your own relationship, I think that is the biggest thing. And for me, like, I don't even run around identifying, like I said, as one way or the other. I want to meet people, and I want to meet people who are open-minded and like-minded enough to say, let's figure it out. I like you, you like me, we're hitting it off, let's figure it out. And I think that is, to me, is the most important part of a relationship, and like how I want to craft my reality and how I want to craft what I'm going to be like in a relationship. That being said, I don't think stringent 100% black and white old school monogamy is for me. I think that's a little too confining. But I would be open to like dating someone who was super serious and we were only with each other for a period of time, or while we discover something about each other, and then possibly like opening that up. But I think that there is a reality, is that like your heart and your mind and your eyes will stray, and it's best to plan for that. And a lot of this can seem like counterintuitive, and a lot of this can seem confusing, but there is a ton of material out there, and I totally recommend reading it. Ethical Slut is the primer for poly. More Than Two is also kind of considered a primer. Sex at Dawn, if you're scientifically minded. And just Google polyamory, poly relationships, how does poly work? And that's what I did. And I went online and I just, what the hell is poly, And you'll find so much out there and so many interesting viewpoints. And what I've noticed from talking to a ton of poly people, from talking to like 100 different poly people, is that not a single one of them does things exactly the same way. I seriously have never met, out of like 100 poly people I've talked to, none of them have told me my relationship is this exact framework and that it matches completely someone else's. It just has never happened. So I think like there's every shade of the rainbow in relationships and in poly, and it's best to find what works for you. Oh, all right. I have ranted for a pretty solid amount of time. There wasn't a lot of comedy here. I feel like I'm lecturing or presenting, but I mean, I wanted to talk about polyamory, like what it means to me, my experiences with it. I personally learn a lot from failure. I learned from like going and striking out, and I have failed. I have been in relationships that were open and had them fall apart, and I've been in relationships that are poly and had them fall apart, and I've been in relationships that are monogamous and I've had them fall apart. And like learning how relationships end and learning something from that and gaining insight from it and applying that going forward to the rest of your life, I think is incredibly important no matter how you're going to pursue relationships. And there's something to be said for failure. So it's taught me that I don't fit into a lot of labels, and that I really need to put more work into crafting a reality with someone who's like-minded than I am just finding another person who's quote-unquote poly or quote-unquote mono and saying, you and me, we're good. It's got to be communication. There's got to be more to it. Uh, all right, well, if anyone has any questions, I'll hang out for like a few seconds and field anything if anyone has questions. A lot of people chiming in here probably know about this stuff already. I'm sure I bounced all over the place, but this is my first stab at doing something more serious, that doing something that's just personal to me, that I identify with, that I've experienced. I will probably go back and forth between being funny in my videos and being real. Thank you guys for chiming in. It was really cool watching the commentary as this goes down. And yeah, I hope you all enjoyed it and got something from it. And feel free to hit me up, message me, or post to me stuff that you'd like to see talked about, or that you know about me, or that you want to hear a story of, or something you'd like to have a dialogue about. All right, well, how do you meet other poly folks? That is a question that I struggle with a lot. I'm new to the East Bay, and so I've struggled to meet people at all. But I will say that you can go to meetup.com, and you can find poly support groups, poly discussion groups, poly events. There's a lot of it there on Meetup. There are Facebook support groups. There are groups for discussion and support, which can just give you advice about being poly or different kinds of poly. Is this bad? Is this jealousy? How do I deal with this? Those have been super invaluable to me. I think that it's something that should be normalized a little more, and that you should talk about more in the open. Bring it up when you meet people. Talk about it on Facebook, and you know, it's kind of scary, but out yourself, I say, like, and then you'll be amazed how many other people either don't care, or they're that way too, and you know, or they're curious. Anyone, you know, when you tell someone your lifestyle or how you really feel as a person and you're judged for it, like, fuck them, delete, block, move on. Like, it doesn't matter. You know, live your life, do what you got to do. All right, well, I don't see any other questions, so I'll leave you guys to it. Thanks so much again, guys. Appreciate it. I still haven't quite figured it all out, but I'm doing my best. So, yeah.